All right. It looks like we're all here. I see that Ms. Murray has raised her hand. Let me just state for the record, this is the afternoon hearing on January 31st, 2022, by the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resource Control Board on the prosecution team's draft cease and desist order against BlueTriton Brands, Inc. So Ms. Murray, your hand is up. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lilly. So I just wanted to let you know that I have a conflict at 4 o'clock on another matter. So Kathleen Miller of our office, who's already appeared in this matter, is going to join. And I just ask your staff to look for her to let her in at about 3:50. I don't know if you otherwise wouldn't be looking to let somebody in from the waiting room.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. Mr. Anderson, Ms. Woldridge, Mr. Woldridge, Ms. Blanc, please keep an eye out for Ms. Miller. She's certainly welcome to join us anytime. And I think she has participated before, so that's fine. And thank you. So, and it looks like Mr. Donnellan, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. I'm trying to see on your squares if Ms. McGuire has joined us. She was having internet connection issues. She did ask us to proceed if she's not able to join right away, but like Ms. Murray just requested, if you all could ensure that she will have access when she joins, we would appreciate it.
Okay, absolutely. Of course, we want her to be able to join. Let me just see if in my participants list, I hope if there was a problem, it wasn't on our end. I hope there wasn't a problem, but if there was.
I think it was on Ms. McGuire's end. And again, Mr. Lilly, if you want to get started, and if I don't see her, I will. There she is.
She was in the waiting room. She's now in.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. One more housekeeping matter, Mr. Lilly, and I'm hoping. I think we're hoping that we will get through the examination of the interested party witnesses today, but I have a personal obligation tomorrow afternoon at 2:30. I note that you have a short calendar tomorrow if we are continuing from today to tomorrow. And I would request that that we either break at 2:30, which would, I think, only allow an hour and a half, or that any testimony that hasn't been completed today be continued to Wednesday.
All right. Why don't you remind me about that when we get to the end of the day today, and we'll know better. We'll see where we are by then and see what the best thing to do is. The reason we're not having a hearing tomorrow morning is my office is having a hearing tomorrow morning in another matter, and my staff, they're really good, but they can only do one hearing at a time.
We'll see them tomorrow. Yes.
So that's why we're scheduled to start at 1 o'clock tomorrow. So let's see where we are. Does your conflict then take up the rest of the day?
It does, unfortunately, yes.
Okay, well, let's see where we are and see where we are at the end of the day today, and we'll handle tomorrow then.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Petrozelli, your hand is up. Please go ahead. But go off. There you go. You're off mute. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Lilly, I forgot to bring this up at the beginning of our session today, this morning, but I do need to request a hard stop today at 5 and also on Wednesday at 5. So,
all right. I certainly
same childcare pickup needs as before.
Well, and I'm certainly sensitive to that. It's not an issue for me anymore, but I know it used to be, and I know what it's like. And I don't anticipate going past 5, but if we're still going at 5, remind me.
Okay, thank you.
And we will do that. That certainly is reasonable. Okay. I think that takes care of our hands for this afternoon. So with that, I'll just remind you, Ms. Fry, you're still under oath, and Mr. Petrozelli, you may begin with your cross-examination questions, and please let us know if you want us to screen share any of the exhibits.
I will. And Ms. Fry, are you up?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, so I only have a couple sets of questions. And something I always tell my witnesses If you think you're speaking too slowly, you're probably going about the right speed.
That's good advice, especially with Ms. Fry.
Yes.
Sorry, Ms. Fry, you've established a track record here.
Yes.
So
So
good
that would
advice
help everyone.
for the court reporter and the rest of us. So
Yes.
thank you, Mr. Petrozelli. Please proceed.
So Ms. Fry, the first thing I wanted to ask you about is your exhibit number 52. So if we could put that on the screen, please.
All right, let's get a FR 52 posted.
So,
Okay, FR 52 is on the
Okay.
screen.
So Ms. Fry, are you familiar with this document?
Yes.
Okay. Can you briefly describe just what it is?
I obtained this document from the Water Resource Institute, and it was a report. Let me get my paper copy here in front of me.
Take your time.
Yeah, it was a report done by Mr. Rowe and Webb, civil engineers, on certain waters in the San Bernardino Mountains for Arrowhead and Puritas, dated April 1948. Right, so we can read.
All right. Thank you. And can we look at page 2, please? And I wanted to focus on this first paragraph below where it says, "Dear Mr. McNevin." And if you can take a moment to read that first sentence in that paragraph.
Okay.
So based on this sentence, would it be reasonable to infer that this was a report commissioned at the request of Arrowhead and Puritas Waters, Inc.?
I believe
Objection.
I,
This is very strange line of questioning. I object, and the document speaks for itself, and Mr. Petrozelli is asking Ms. Fry to interpret the meaning of a document that she did not write, she did not prepare, and that she's testified that she obtained from another source.
I mean, if it's
It's
adequate.
okay, Mr. Petrozelli. The objection is overruled on this basis. I mean, normally, Ms. Grady, I would agree with you. Basically, we can all interpret this document and read it as well as Ms. Fry can. However, Ms. Fry has demonstrated she has specialized knowledge beyond that which the rest of us have through her extensive research and review of documents regarding this matter. So I'm going to allow her to answer Mr. Petrozelli's question, but I do think your objection is worth noting, Ms. Grady. I think it probably goes to the weight of her testimony rather than the admissibility of her testimony. So I'm going to overrule your objection and allow Ms. Fry to answer. And Mr. Petrozelli, why don't you just ask the same question of Ms. Fry again so it's clear in her mind.
Okay. So Ms. Fry, based on this paragraph, is it reasonable to infer that this was a report specifically prepared at the request of Arrowhead and Puritas Waters?
I know that from the title. I would assume that from the title is what
Okay.
I can say.
Okay, and that's all I wanted to ask you about this.
Okay.
May we look at exhibit BTB 12. So this is one of the BlueTriton exhibits.
Okay, we'll get it. We'll post BTB 12 and screen share that.
And if you can,
tell us where you want us to zoom in on so we can read it.
I will. Page 17, please.
Okay, we'll make that a little larger. We have page 17 of exhibit BTB 12 up now.
Ms. Fry, do you recognize?
Excuse me, Mr. Woldridge, why don't you make it 2 notches bigger if you can? There we go. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Petrozelli.
Ms. Fry, do you recognize this?
Can you scroll down a little bit? Is it?
Yeah, and Mr. Waldridge, just make it one notch bigger so that I can read it.
I just wanted
There
to
we
make
go.
sure I clipped that. It looks familiar. Yes.
Okay. And actually, I wanted to direct our attention to the bottom of this page. Where it says Amanda Fry 6. Is that you?
Yes.
Okay. And why is it there?
I believe it says clip by. So I have a subscription to newspapers.com and you can clip articles electronically. So I guess it puts your name on that after you do that.
So this was an article that you clipped.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Wait. Ms. Fry, try really hard to say yes and no and not
Oh, yes. Okay. Sorry. Excuse me.
Thank you.
Yes.
So those are all the questions I have for you, but as a general matter, when you're answering yes or no questions, you want to be careful to say yes or no, so it's clear on the record and in the recording.
All right, I think I've taken care of that, Mr. Petrozelli. So is that the end of your questions for Ms.
Yes.
Fry? All right, thank you. All right, so Ms. Grady, you may proceed with your questions of Ms. Fry, cross-examination questions at this time.
Thank you. Hi, Ms. Fry. My name is Shonda Grady. I'm an attorney for BlueTriton Brands. And I have a tendency to speak way too fast. So both of us hopefully can slow each other down. And I certainly won't chide you for it. But know that if I do ask or if someone asks, we all do the same. So I'm just going to start. I just have a very few questions for you, mostly about your experience. And again, if they're yes or no questions, I just ask that you verbally respond with yes or no. In the notices of intent, you are not identified as an expert witness. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that's true with respect to your testimony that you prepared on your own behalf that we just went through today. Is that correct?
Yes.
And although I'm jumping ahead a little bit for purposes of efficiency, is that true with respect to the notice of intent regarding your testimony that you're providing as a witness for story of stuff as well?
Yes.
Are you a trained or certified hydrologist?
No.
Are you a trained or certified hydrogeologist?
No.
Are you a trained or certified geologist?
No.
Are you a trained or certified cartographer?
No.
Are you a trained or certified surveyor?
No.
Are you a trained or certified historian?
No.
Are you a trained or certified attorney or legal expert?
No.
On or about May 6th, 2016, you sent an email to the state board regarding BlueTriton Brands water right at issue. Is that correct?
And Ms. Fry, if you need to, we can post
Sure.
it, which might make it easier for all of us, including me.
Yeah.
Right.
If we pull up
right.
PT 105, please.
Yeah, let's pull up PT 105 and we can all look at it. We're testing my staff here. They have to get exhibits from a whole bunch of different parties, but they're good. There's PT 105. Which is this? You want to start with page 1, Ms. Grady?
Yes.
All right, we have PT 105, page 1 on the screen now. Please proceed.
Ms. Fry, do you recognize this document?
Looks like it was sent by me.
And this, do you understand that this document is you raising some issues regarding what is now BlueTriton brand, what is now referred to as BlueTriton brands, the water rights.
Attorney is testifying.
I'm
No, I'm going to overrule the objection. These are appropriate foundational questions. I'm going to give Ms. Grady the opportunity to establish a foundation. I assume she's leading to other questions.
Was
Go
this
ahead, Ms.
about,
Grady.
thank you. Was this about, as I was just trying to clarify, because the name change, the water rights that are currently at issue in relation to BlueTriton brands in this proceeding?
Yes.
And did you discuss any of BlueTriton brands or any of its predecessors and interest water rights with anyone else, anyone at the State Water Board? And for clarification of the record, that means prosecution team, investigation unit, enforcement unit, board members, anybody. Did you discuss any of BlueTriton brands or its predecessor and interest water rights with anyone at the State Board before you sent this email?
This was sent to the State Board. Can you clarify the State Board? Because I know Felicia Marcus was on the State Board.
Okay, did you discuss the water rights or your concerns or allegations regarding the water rights of BlueTriton brands or its predecessor interests with Ms. Marcus before this email?
I only communicated with Ms. Marcus via the state email.
Okay. Did you send any allegations or questions about the water rights at issue before sending this email? Or is this kicking it off? I'm just trying to establish, was there more before this, or does this start your relationship with the board regarding the water rights? And there I go getting fast, I'm sorry.
I think I can help you out, Ms. Fry.
Oh,
Do you remember sending any emails to Ms. Marcus or anyone else at the State Water Board before May 6, 2016?
I don't remember.
Since sending this email, it's correct that you have submitted additional information to the prosecution team, correct?
Yes.
And since sending this email, you have submitted additional information to the enforcement unit. Is that correct also?
Can you define enforcement unit?
Have you sent? We'll just drop it. We can strike that question. Were you permitted to respond to the 2017 ROI?
I believe so.
At any point, did the prosecution team refuse to accept any information from you?
Yes, I think so.
At what point did they refuse to accept information from you?
I would have to go through emails or
Do you recall if it was a certain point in time where they stopped accepting information from you?
no.
Do you recall if there was a certain type of information that they refused to accept from you?
No.
But you think there may have been some that they refused to accept from you?
I honestly don't remember. I tried to hear by the deadlines.
Do you recall if you submitted any information to the State Water Board after it issued the 2021 report of investigation in April 2021?
And excuse me, Ms. Grady, I know this is not intentional, but I assume you mean any information to the prosecution team, because obviously Ms. Fry submitted information to the Administrative Hearings Office. So you might want to clarify that question.
Correct. And I'm speaking separate and apart from the documents that we've submitted that you submitted at December 17th to Mr. Lilly and the hearing office. So I'm asking about documents that you sent to the prosecution team before you've submitted your documents to this proceeding as a foundation. So my question is, did you submit any documents to the prosecution team after it issued the April 2021 report of investigation?
I don't recall.
Is it correct that the prosecution team cited to information that you provided to them in the 2017 report of investigation?
Yes,
Is it correct that the prosecution team cited to information you provided to them in the 2021 report of investigation?
yes,
Are you familiar with the documents that you assert that you obtained from the Water Resources Institute?
yes,
Did you ever submit those documents to the prosecution team?
some,
Do you recall when you forwarded documents you received from the Water Resources Institute to the prosecution team?
no,
Do you recall what documents you obtained from the Water Resources Institute that you provided to the prosecution team?
Mr. Lilly, I suggest that we remind Ms. Fry, since she's not an attorney and doesn't have an attorney available, that she is able to consult her notes if she needs to.
So Ms. Fry, you should testify to the best of your recollection if you remember, and say if you don't, but I'll follow Ms. Doty's suggestion. If you have notes that you think would help you recall, you may look at them. You don't have to, or you can just advise Ms. Grady that you don't recall. It's up to you.
I just don't recall. These are very specific questions. I don't recall exactly.
My final questions are about your testimony. Did you prepare the summary testimony that you presented today?
Yes,
Did anyone assist you in preparing that testimony?
I wrote it. And then I practiced with Story of Stuff attorney Rachel Doty.
Did anyone else assist you?
No,
And do you have any notes that you've used in relation to your testimony today?
yes,
Any correspondence regarding your testimony today?
correspondence.
Like emails, text messages?
What, in regards to the testimony,
Yes.
what I said?
What you planned to say or what you said, yes.
Oh, I don't know. Can you clarify exactly what you're asking?
Sure. You said that you practiced with Miss Doty. So for example, did you make any notes or an outline or have emails or text messages with Miss Doty or anybody else regarding your testimony?
During or before?
Before or during?
No, I would have to look.
Okay, can I ask that you just take a look and preserve all notes and emails and text messages and don't delete those, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think that's all
Yeah,
I
so
have.
Ms. Fry, I think what Ms. Gray is just asking, I think it's fairly straightforward. When you were preparing for the hearing today, did you send any emails to Ms. Doty or receive any emails from Ms. Doty? And she's asking you, if you did, to preserve those, and I'm asking you to do that too. She's not asking you to produce them now, but just don't delete those, okay?
Okay. Yes.
That's fine. Ms. Gray, does that take care of your concern or your issue on that?
It does. Thank you, and that concludes my cross-examination.
All right, thank you. All right, I don't think there was anyone else who asked to cross-examine Ms. Fry. I don't see any. Let me just make sure I get into the right view here. Don't see any hands up. So with that, I'm going to help Ms. Fry out. Ms. Fry, I assume you'd like to offer your exhibits into evidence. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So I think we have exhibits FR1 through FR151, FR151 was Ms. Fry's declaration, which we treated as her written proposed testimony. And then she used that to testify to. And we also, I'm just checking here. We have exhibit FR150, which was her original declaration, and then 151 was updated. So I assume we do not need to offer 150 into evidence. So Ms. Fry, would you like to offer exhibits FR1 through FR149 and exhibit FR151 into evidence?
Yes.
All right. So is there any are there any objections to any of these exhibits?
Yes.
All right. So that's first of all, does anybody besides Ms. Grady have any objections to any of these exhibits? All right. Hearing none, Ms. Grady, please state your objections.
The objections to the documentary evidence, I think, are stated in detail in the motion in limine, with the exception of the hearsay objections, which I believe you clarified could be addressed to the extent they're relied upon in any briefs. With respect to Ms. Fry's written and oral testimony, I again restate our objection to the extent that the majority of her testimony was either repeating hearsay testimony in documents for which we don't believe a proper foundation was laid, or opinion testimony that was outside the scope of lay testimony.
And so, Ms. Grady, can you explain what you mean by no proper foundation was laid?
She didn't articulate, and this goes back to the issue that I think I've raised a few times, is the relevance to the proceeding. I appreciate what you've explained, that if it speaks to anything in Strawberry Canyon. However, I continue to object on the grounds that they have not explained the basis for which they're proffering these documents, other than to essentially throw everything at the wall that might be used in a later proceeding to be identified as evidence in the record supporting some conclusion about which nothing was discussed.
Okay, I don't think that's a foundational objection. I think you're objecting on grounds of relevance. And I do hear your objection based on relevance. And then also I did hear your objection based on opinion testimony. So.
And I understood the hearsay to be kind of put off, but please correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to.
All right, so I think I covered most of this in my ruling this morning on your motion in limine, but let me make sure that I am clear on this. I don't think there's any valid objection on basis of foundation. So to the extent there's an objection on foundational grounds, it's overruled. As far as relevance goes, I think it's possible that some of these exhibits are not going to ultimately be relevant to the hearing issues, but I just don't think it's efficient for us to go through and it would be parsing out parts of different documents that may or may not be relevant. So I'm going to overrule the objection on relevance grounds. But if you think that the proposed order that this office prepares refers to some of Ms. Fry's exhibits and parts of them that are not relevant, you may raise that when you comment on the proposed order. I'm not sure exactly how that would come up, because obviously if I cite something in the proposed order, I'm going to think it's relevant. But if you think that I am citing something in the proposed order that is not relevant, you may raise that objection. So otherwise, your objection on relevance grounds is overruled, but I will allow you that reservation. As far as opinion testimony, I've ruled before, I think Ms. Fry's testimony generally is within the scope of Government Code 11513 subdivision C, which definitely is a broader standard of admissibility than Evidence Code 801B. I think Ms. Fry does have some specialized knowledge that would qualify under 801B, but I don't think that's the legal standard here. I think the legal standard is Government Code 11513C. Now, I'm going to overrule the objection on the basis of opinion testimony. However, again, Ms. Grady, if you believe that the proposed order cites something that is in one of Ms. Fry's exhibits or in her testimony, it would be not her exhibits, but in her testimony, that you think is an opinion as to which she is not qualified to give, you may raise that argument. But as I said before, I think that objection primarily goes to the weight of the evidence in her testimony rather than the admissibility. So it's overruled to that extent. And then finally, you correctly stated, I'm going to give the parties, which presumably will be primarily BlueTriton here, an opportunity to raise objections on hearsay basis and compliance or consistency with Government Code 11513D after the parties have filed their closing briefs. We'll allow a separate opportunity for objections for that before the matter is submitted. So with that, other than those statements, those limited exceptions, your objections are overruled. Did you have any specific objections, or any objections to specific exhibits, or was it just your generalized objections to all the exhibits?
No, I think we're done addressing it. Getting terrible feedback.
Yeah, try again. Start over. You broke up there. I want to make sure we hear this correctly.
I said we'll stand on our written and previously stated objections. Thank you.
All right. So with that, exhibits FR1 through FR149 and exhibit FR151 are admitted into evidence. As I said before, FR150 is an earlier version of the testimony, so I'm not going to admit that into evidence. With that, thank you, Ms. Fry. I hope you've learned, if you ever testify again, you're going to have to slow it down to about 75% speed, which, if it makes you feel any better, I think every single person in this hearing has had to learn that. So welcome to the club. I know I was one of the worst offenders and have had many court reporters chide me for speaking too fast, but I think you're learning, and I appreciate your patience and working with us on that. So with that, we are going to proceed with Ms. Doty's, she has Story of Stuff, has an opening statement, which is going to be given by Mr. O'Heaney. There was correspondence where Ms. Doty requested that, and I allowed that. And again, Mr. O'Heaney, first of all, good afternoon. I don't know if you've introduced yourself, but good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And I do want to remind you and confirm on the record, your opening statement is not evidence. It's primarily supposed to be summaries of the evidence that the Story of Stuff project witnesses are going to give. I will give you some leeway on this, just the way I've allowed other parties to present policy statements. So I think the best thing to do is let's have you give your opening statement now. We've only been going for a little over half an hour this afternoon. And then I'm going to ask Ms. Doty to kind of give me some time estimates and orders for her summaries, presenting summaries of story of stuff projects witnesses. So with that, Mr. O'Heaney, good afternoon and please proceed. And just as a reminder, please do try to keep it to about 5 minutes.
Understood. Good afternoon, Mr. Lilly, and thank you for the opportunity to present our opening statement. My name is Michael O'Heaney, and I'm the Executive Director of the Story of Stuff Project, a California-based nonprofit organization. For the past 7 years, we've worked with Inland Empire residents to end the removal of water from Strawberry Creek by BlueTriton Brands and its predecessor, Nestle Waters North America.
And I'm going to remind you, Mr. O'Heaney, Mr. Petrozelli's comment, if you think you're talking too slowly, you're probably going about right. And right now, I think you're going too fast. So before the court reporter steps in, please turn it down to about 80% of where you were and please proceed. I want to be able to hear it. I want the court reporter to get it down. So don't rush it, please. And please proceed now.
Understood. Thank you. Our interest in this case began in 2015 during the mid-20-teens drought when Desert Sun journalist Ian James reported that Nestle's permit from the Forest Service to operate on public lands had expired 27 years earlier. During this period, we first met Steve Lowe and Gary Ernie, two retired Forest Service professionals, and Amanda Fry, a Redlands resident and frequent visitor to the National Forest. Their whistleblowing efforts aided the Desert Sun investigation, and we featured the trio in a short documentary we produced on the permit controversy.
And excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Fry, but I'm trying to take notes. Who was the third person? Gary
Ernie, who is also a retired Forest Service ranger.
All right, thank you. Please go ahead. I'm writing.
Understood.
This is another reason to go slowly. Please go ahead.
Understood, no problem. With them and a number of state and national partners, our organization has actively challenged BlueTriton's unlawful diversion of water from Strawberry Creek. A 2015 lawsuit we filed resulted in a settlement agreement with the Forest Service that required the agency to issue a new 5-year special use permit. That permit included an adaptive management plan, or as the Forest Service described in its decision memo, quote, measures to improve the watershed's health, which is currently rated as impaired, end quote. In the years since, we've maintained oversight of the Forest Service's management of BlueTriton's operation by filing several dozen Freedom of Information Act requests. Many of the documents produced as a result have been introduced as evidence in this hearing. During the course of our litigation against the Forest Service, it became clear that the origin story Nestle had long spun about its right to the water was just that, a story. So in 2016, we joined a number of other individuals and organizations in urging the State Water Resources Control Board to investigate the underlying legal basis for the removal of water from Strawberry Creek. What is now exceedingly clear from the staff investigation, Amanda Fry's research, and our own legal and scientific work is that BlueTriton and its predecessors have been taking water to which they have no valid right for nearly a century. The result has been a misrepresentation to the people of California and the United States that has been egregious in both its scope and in its harm to our shared resources. Despite BlueTriton Brands' claims to the contrary, the historical documents, scientific evidence, and public records we intend to introduce into evidence make clear that, 1, the water diverted by BlueTriton Brands is surface water, rendering the Water Board well within its authority to regulate the diversions. 2, neither BlueTriton nor its predecessor companies perfected any pre-1914 right as they continue to claim here and in public communications. And 3, the arguments they are making before this office are aimed at sowing confusion and forcing a delay of the inevitable, namely the loss of a valuable natural resource to which BlueTriton, without a basis in reality, feels entitled. With the patina of time, the Arrowhead brand developed an undeserved facade of authenticity. That is, until Amanda Fry, Steve Lowe, and many other citizens challenged its foundation. Reduced to its simplest element, our community's argument is this: one cannot sell what it does not own. And BlueTriton does not own, nor does it hold a right to, the water in Strawberry Creek. Perhaps realizing its precarious position, BlueTriton is now attempting an end run by claiming the water it removes is actually groundwater, outside the regulatory authority of the board and better regulated by the Forest Service. This latest claim is as curious as it is false, given that the special use permits issued by the Forest Service explicitly state that they convey no right to water. BlueTriton's latest position is also contrary to the representations it has made to the FDA, in public-facing infographics, and in op-eds. In closing, let me just say that after investing an enormous amount of financial and human resources in this case, we have high hopes that the Water Board will finally put an end to, or at least significantly curtail, BlueTriton's unauthorized diversion of water. As Californians and others in the American West have learned anew the past several years, water is a precious shared resource. We honor the public service of those charged by the people of California with preserving our state's water resources, and would like to extend our appreciation to both the board staff for their diligent work, and to you, Mr. Lilly, for the opportunity to participate in this important process. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. O'Haney. And I'll just say, you got the pace right. You didn't get the court reporter upset, so thank you very much, and we appreciate your comments this afternoon. Thank you. All right, so Ms. Doty, what order would you like to present your witnesses? As I understand it, your three witnesses are yourself, Ms. Fry, and Mr. Lowe.
So the only one that I anticipate having direct oral testimony is Mr. Lowe. And then again, my testimony and Ms. Fry's testimony was limited to authentication of documents, many of which have already been admitted with Ms. Fry and prosecution team documents, evidence. So I think it should be relatively short, but I guess Ms. Fry and I are both here and available if there's cross about that.
All right, thank you. So allow me a couple of minutes here. I have to shift papers.
Okay.
I just have to ask, Ms. Doty, this is a source of frustration to me. I don't want you to take this personally, but is there any reason why your Story of Stuff project exhibit numbers aren't sequential, why there's so many gaps in the numbering system? It just sort of, I'll just say, it's driving me crazy.
I apologize. We had organized the exhibits by type. So for example, report or correspondence. And then when there was the ruling made about public trust resources not being at issue, we removed exhibits. And at that point, we had already cited to them. So they're in blocks.
So that's a nice way of blaming me for the gaps, which is okay. So that's fine. Thank you. So it's a good explanation. They still drive me crazy, but I certainly understand how it happened now that you've explained it. So let's do this. I think we can just have you and Ms. Fry authenticate your written proposed testimony, and you do not need to provide a summary, and there's really no reason to for the reason you just stated. And then we'll proceed with Mr. Lowe, and you can work with him to summarize his. So first of all, Ms. Doty, you have not testified yet in this hearing, so please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And we have labeled what you call Declaration of Rachel S. Doty in support of the AHO hearing I know I'm going too fast. Draft, says draft desist order against BlueTriton Brands, Inc. for unauthorized diversion and water use. We labeled this as SOS 29. Is this in fact your testimony for this hearing, Ms. Doty?
Yes.
All right. Now, Ms. Fry, I'm going to just do this for you, Ms. Doty, because I can do it pretty fast. You are still under oath in this proceeding, so you do not need to take the oath again. We have labeled a declaration of Amanda Fry in support of draft cease and desist order against BlueTriton Brands, Inc. for unauthorized water diversion and water use as exhibit SOS 30. Is this in fact your testimony on behalf of Story of Stuff Project for this hearing?
Yes.
All right. And now, Mr. Lowe, you are still under oath. You took the oath away. I take it back. I do not think you have testified yet. So please raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will be giving in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right. So, Mr. Lowe, we have labeled the declaration. It's called Declaration of Steve Lowe in support of draft cease and desist order against BlueTriton Brands, Inc. for unauthorized water diversion and water use. We've labeled this as Story of Stuff Project Exhibit 31. Is this in fact your testimony on behalf of Story of Stuff Project for this hearing?
Yes.
All right. So with that, Ms. Doty, I'll turn it to you. From what you just said a few minutes ago, I assume you would like to ask Mr. Lowe to summarize his testimony. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So, and again, this is what drives me crazy is when people deviate from their written testimony. But please, if you can help guide him through a summary of his written testimony on behalf of Story of Stuff Project, which is exhibit SOS 31. And then we will turn next to, after we're done with Story of Stuff Project's case, we will turn to his separate exhibit that he submitted on his own behalf. So with that, please proceed to ask him questions to summarize his written proposed testimony.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Lowe.
Good afternoon.
All right, I'll start with an easy question for you. Could you just describe briefly your professional background, please?
Yes, I was trained at New Mexico State University, went to work for the Forest Service in 1970 as a range conservationist, actually. New Mexico State was an agricultural school, so I was able to get a lot of training in range management, water management, and soil management. I started my first job on the Prescott National Forest as a range conservationist, then later went to the forest biologist.
Objection. I'm having a hard time finding where this is in the written testimony.
All right. Miss Doty, I'm going to allow you to ask him a very brief summary of his education and experience. I understand that there was some confusion. I mean, I thought our hearing notice was pretty clear, but I do think I have discretion to allow him to testify here slightly beyond his written proposed testimony, just to provide a foundation of his education and experience. So please ask your questions in a way that we can just get through this pretty quickly. And to that extent, Ms. Grady's objection is overruled.
Can I go ahead and finish? I'd started something.
No, let Ms. Doty ask you another question. We've got a little interruption there.
Mr. Lowe, when did you first start working on issues in Strawberry Creek?
I was involved in issues in Strawberry Creek in the early 80s. Then that continued through the 90s into the 2000s. So about 30, 40 years I've been involved directly in Strawberry Creek in one way or another.
And what was the scope?
Excuse me, Ms. Doty, this has gotten a little bit garbled. I do want a little more background on Mr. Lowe's experience. So, Mr. Lowe, I believe you testified you received a bachelor's degree from New Mexico State University. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what was the major? What was your major?
My major, what I wanted to do was to make sure I qualified as a wildlife biologist and a fisheries biologist and a range conservationist. So my BS was in agriculture, I believe, with an emphasis in wildlife, range, and fisheries biology.
All right. And do you have any subsequent college degrees?
No subsequent college degree.
And then your employment, you said you started at the Prescott National Forest. Did you do that right after college? Was that your first job after you got your degree?
Yes.
And how long were you at Prescott National Forest?
I was there 4 years and then went to Eureka, California for 3 years, and then back to Tucson, Arizona for 3 years, and then to San Bernardino for the last 30 years of my career. All
right. And that time at Tucson, Eureka, and Prescott, was that all working for the Forest Service?
Yes.
And what was your, just in a few words, I know you could probably spend a lot, what was your general work experience there? What kinds of work did you do?
I did primarily biology, and a lot of it was related to fisheries biology, which required me to spend a lot of time directly working with hydrologists.
All right, thank you. So, Ms. Doty, I'm going to hand it back to you here. So why don't you start with Mr. Lowe's work experience at the San Bernardino National Forest? And again, let's try to get through the background pretty quickly. I think a couple of questions about his work experience with San Bernardino National Forest would be useful before you get into the principal part of his testimony, which is relations to the hearing issues in this case. So please proceed that way if you can.
Okay, what was your title at the San Bernardino National Forest at the time you retired?
I was the forest biologist at that time.
Did you hold any other titles during your tenure at San Bernardino National Forest?
I was the resource officer for a 3 or 4 year period, which meant that I was responsible for all the resources, including hydrology, geology, biology, and so forth for the entire forest.
Okay, and then with regard to Strawberry Canyon, during what period of time was that under your job description? Was that part of your responsibility geographically?
Strawberry Creek was part of my geographic responsibility the entire time I was on the forest, 30 some years. I specifically, Mr. Lawrence mentioned that there was a real bad wildfire in 2003 and then a subsequent flood that killed 14 people. I was the co-lead on that fire restoration, and it's called Burned Area Emergency Response Team. I was a co-team leader, and Strawberry Creek was a big part of that. It's very close to where the 14 people were killed in the flood. And so it means a lot to me. I'm sorry. So yeah, that was something I had a lot of responsibility for in Strawberry Creek, plus the tunnel project, which was, like I said in my thing, was the biggest tunnel ever on National Forest land. It went through fractured granite, very similar to where these springs are. And it was in the adjacent watershed to Strawberry Creek. So part of our evaluation for that tunnel was to make sure that Strawberry Creek wasn't damaged by the tunnel. So I spent a lot of time looking at Strawberry Creek, City Creek, Sand Canyon, Berea Canyon, Waterman Canyon, and Devil's Canyon, which were all crossed by the tunnel to make sure that they weren't damaged by the tunnel, and that if we needed to, we could irrigate, which we did. Metropolitan Water District ended up putting miles and miles and miles of pipe onto the National Forest to protect those springs and streams that were affected by.
I need to interrupt again. I apologize, but I need to object. This is all beyond the scope of the written testimony. I'm trying to get my arms around all this.
I'm going to allow him to finish what he just said, and then it will be time to move on. I'm going to allow this as background. And again, it's very frustrating to me when parties offer summaries that aren't summaries. And I know you're all doing the best you can, but on the other hand, the hearing notice was pretty clear about this. So I'm going to exercise my discretion to allow Mr. Lowe just in a couple of sentences finish summarizing your work on the tunnel project. And then, Ms. Doty, I'm going to ask you to try to ask questions that have him summarize what's actually in his written testimony. So go ahead, Mr. Lowe, just wrap up your summary of what you did working for the Forest Service regarding the tunnel project.
Yes, so the tunnel project had a team of experts. There was about 12 of us, including hydrologists, geologists, hydrogeologists, tunnel boring machine experts. And we would meet at least weekly during tunnel construction to evaluate the flows into the tunnel, evaluate groundwater depths and pressures, and evaluate surface water presence or absence, and spring flows. Based on those spring flows, the 12 of us would decide what needed to be done. We sometimes required that they stop the tunnel boring machine to let the grouting people get it grouted completely. At times we required irrigation, and we helicoptered in pipe to put irrigation in. So that was a very important job, one of the most important jobs I was ever involved in. And I worked very, very closely day to day with geologists, hydrogeologists, and tunnel experts. So I learned a lot about geology, a lot about hydrogeology, a lot about surface water relationships, and the biology associated with it. So I feel very qualified to be talking about this subject. Thanks.
And I
Okay, so that's.
Can I object again? All of this is surprise testimony that was not included in the written testimony. It's being proffered by an organization that has an attorney representing them. And this has gone far beyond the scope.
Mr. Lilly, I apologize.
Go ahead, Ms. Doty, go ahead.
Mr. Lilly, Mr. Lowe's, about half of his testimony, pages and pages, go into his background. He talked about the tunnel project. He talked about working for the United States Forest Service. Without significantly leading my witness, I can't have him say precisely what is in his statement. So.
All right, so I do see paragraph 8 on page 3 talks about Mr. Lowe's experience regarding the tunnel project. And I think there was also, that's the main place I see that. So there's at least some discussion of this background. So the objection is overruled, but with that, let's proceed to focus on summarizing his work in Strawberry Creek Canyon and related to the specific hearing issues for this hearing.
And Mr. Lilly, may I please ask that, just for clarification, that I think what we're doing is the opposite. So you have asked each of the witnesses to provide a summary, which should be a condensed version. And what we're having here instead is an expanded version, such that the written submitted testimony in advance seems to be what was actually the summary. And we're expanding upon it, leaving the respondent in this action to take notes on all of this surprise testimony and try to figure out how, if at all appropriate, to ask any cross-examination where this should have been prepared and it's leading the exercise a bit out of control.
All right. I don't know whether that was an objection or a motion to strike, but if it was an objection, it's overruled. If it's a motion to strike, it's denied. This is background material. I just need to have it so I can understand the basis for Mr. Lowe's experience here going forward. But with that, I'm not going to allow any further testimony regarding background. And now, Ms. Doty, your questions really do have to focus on what is in his written testimony and what concerns Strawberry Creek.
Okay. So, Mr. Lowe, as part of your professional duties at the Forest Service, did you work on special use permits?
Yes, I provided the biological input to the special use permits. And then I also, towards the end of my career, I was the lead on reissuing special use permits for 800 cabins that had been there for close to 100 years in many cases, and having to decide what to do about their water take from various drainages and springs. And so that was the biggest thing we worked on. Anyway, yes, that's it.
Were you at all involved or aware of the special use permit for the, what was then Nestle's diversion while you were employed by the Forest Service?
Yes, and I was involved several times at evaluating that project or that special use permit and trying to evaluate what to do about reissuance of the permit.
Okay, and have you ever been to the infrastructure that's at issue in this case?
Yes, I've seen almost all of it. I've been to all the springs except 10, 11, and 12. I'm excited about seeing those. I've been to the others and I've seen most of the pipeline, either from the air or from the ground.
Okay. And what studies or other materials did you review in preparation for your written and oral testimony?
I read all of the Forest Service reports that I could find that dealt with this permit, dealt with the springs, and dealt with the environment. That included Michelle Biermar, who's a Forest Service geologist, expert, really an expert. She was the tunnel hydrogeologist and did unbelievable work. I also reviewed Rob Taylor's report done for the reissuance of the permit. Rob Taylor is a hydrologist on the San Bernardino that is very, very respected. I reviewed quite a few of the reports that BlueTriton and their predecessors had paid to have done over the years, including the Mann report, several Dames and Moore reports, 1999, 2001. And then I reviewed the Rowe papers that we've found. Thank God we found those, because you almost never have this kind of information to base decisions on when it gets that old. So these were a treasure trove, and thank goodness we found them. And they were paid for by BlueTriton's predecessors. And so I reviewed all of those. I could give you the numbers, but that wouldn't add anything here, I don't think. I reviewed the Haley Aldrich stream recon surveys, and those were done in 2016. And those are really important because they really clearly show the current conditions of all the springs and the stream, and where there's water and where there's not. So with those and the Rowe papers together, it paints a real picture of what it was like in 1930 and what it's like today. And that's very important.
Mr. Lowe, as part of your work as a biologist on the forest, is it important for you to understand the habitat of the species that you are or as your former job on the forest, was it important for you to understand the habitat of the species that it was your duty to protect?
Actually, the Forest Service's primary job is habitat. The state fish and wildlife agencies take the lead on populations of animals. The Forest Service's job, and I was told the first day I got to work that my job is to make sure the habitat stays healthy for the animals. That was my job.
So was Strawberry Creek Canyon or Strawberry Canyon within the geographic scope of the area where you were concerned with habitat personally?
Yeah, yes. Strawberry Creek is one of the most important areas on the San Bernardino National Forest because of its relationship between other drainages. City Creek is the next.
All right, Mr. Lowe, I think you're getting beyond the question
Okay.
and I think beyond your testimony. So let's cut it off there. Mr. Doty, please proceed.
Were you involved in any restoration efforts at any time that involved Strawberry Creek?
The only restoration efforts that I was actually involved in was the 2003 old fire damage from the fire. Well, I think I actually went out there one other time and looked at the infrastructure that needed to be repaired following floods. So there may have been 2 times that I was involved in looking at the infrastructure. Yeah.
And do you know what the relative priority is of Strawberry Creek for restoration as compared to other regional streams?
Yeah, I'm going to object for you, Ms. Grady. Ms. Doty, I don't think that is relevant to our hearing issue. So we've excluded issues regarding public trust. And I'm allowing him to testify about habitat to the extent it shows what he was focusing on during his work experience, because I think that is important as a basis for understanding his experience and his expertise and work experience here. But specifically talking about priorities of different watersheds for biological purposes, I think it's beyond the hearing issues unless you can explain to me why it's not.
I can. The prioritization of this stream, Mr. Lowe testifies in paragraph 11, is that it doesn't have natural flows at this time and that it would otherwise be a priority for restoration. I believe. I would allow Mr. Lowe to say if I'm mischaracterizing that, but I believe that when he says natural flows, that means that they would anticipate otherwise there would be more water in that drainage.
I don't think that's a valid basis for that question, so I think you better move on.
Okay, Mr. Lowe, are you aware of the history of spotted dace in Strawberry Canyon?
They're speckled dace.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah, spotted owls. There's spotted owls there and speckled dace.
Objection.
Yeah.
Same, going outside the scope.
That one I'm going to overrule because I think this does have to do with evidence that bears on the amount of the base flows in the creek. So go ahead. Mr. Lowe, just please tell us what you know about the history of speckled dace in Strawberry Creek.
Yes, from the geology, downstream barriers, and the fact that dace have been there at least for 100 years that we know about. The Strawberry Creek has supported speckled dace for thousands of years, and only in the last 100 years have speckled dace been eliminated. The combination of the 2003 drought.
Objection. We're again going beyond the scope of the written testimony.
Overruled. I'm seeing this in paragraph 42, at least in paragraph 41. So please go ahead, Mr. Lowe.
Yeah, so so speckled dace have been there a long time. The combination of the fire, 2003, the flood on Christmas Day, and the fact that BlueTriton had been taking water for several years during another drought period, resulted in the loss of the dace. There was no place for them to hide. They were down to very limited habitat.
Objection again. This is assuming facts not in evidence and going beyond what is in the written testimony. This appears to be expanding upon the written testimony to add additional opinions and thoughts, as opposed to a summary of the written testimony.
Mr. Lilly, should we take a break perhaps to allow Ms. Grady to read the testimony? Because it is true that 41 and 42, it talks about stream drying, trout and other native fish can't be sustained. Mr. Lowe has testified in his summary that he was present there, that the
I'll represent that I read it. It's going beyond. Thank you, Ms. Doty.
All right. I'm having some problems here, I will just say. Mr. Lowe, Mr. Lowe's written testimony does discuss these, but I do think he's not summarizing it. I think he is going beyond what's in the written testimony. So, and again, this is, as I say, it's really frustrating to me because I just want to say, I told you all not to do this, and now you're doing it. So I'm going to sustain the objection and ask you to go forward. And I know, Ms. Doty, you're doing the best you can. And let's take a break. Let's take a 15-minute break, and you can talk to Mr. Lowe as you want, although, of course, you don't have any attorney-client privilege. But I want this to be a summary, and I think you are getting beyond a summary. So let's take a break, and you need to figure out, I'm sorry if I'm being a little strident here, but this is just contrary to what I said in the hearing notice I wanted people to do. So let's figure out, you work with Mr. Lowe, figure out how we can get a summary of his testimony. And we'll be back at 2:30. Thank you.
Rachel. Hello?
Mr. Lowe, you're not muted.
All right, we're generally back. Mr. Lowe, yeah, make sure you get on the screen so we can see you. So, Ms. Stody, we do have Mr. Lowe's written proposed testimony, which I have read, will read, is part of the record. So I'm not sure how much more summarizing of his testimony is necessary. And I do want to limit it to summarizing. So how do you propose we proceed here?
I spoke to Mr. Lowe, asked that he have his testimony, his printed testimony in front of him, and I will reference the paragraph numbers that I am drawing my questions from.
Okay, let's do that, and we'll, thank you. I think that will help a lot. Let's do that, and again, just remember that the summary is just sort of to get us all on the same page, but I have read all this, so we don't need to summarize every single paragraph. But with that, please proceed.
Okay, Mr. Lowe, I'm moving on to the portion of your testimony that was the summary of your professional opinion. And that starts at paragraph 16 of your testimony. And so my next question for you is, what is the impact of BT and its predecessors' special use permit on the forest, on the wetness of the West Fork of Strawberry Creek? Mr. Lowe, you're on mute.
Okay. The development of the springs in Strawberry Creek has completely stopped any flows from reaching the main stem of Strawberry Creek. Strawberry Creek used to have over 100 gallons per minute in the headwater springs, just 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's now down to half of a gallon per minute.
I'm going to object again. And again, it seems like we're expanding upon the summary in this area that you pointed to, Ms. Doty, rather than summarizing.
Mr. Lowe, I'll move on to my next question.
All right, let's move on. I'm going to overrule the objection, but ask Ms. Stody to move on.
What is, I believe you already answered this, Mr. Lowe, but I will ask it again just to be certain. In paragraph 17, you discussed the natural spring flows and base flows in Strawberry Canyon. And to what degree has BT's diversions impacted the natural spring flows and base flows near the diversions?
They've completely eliminated them.
I'm going to move on to the historical evidence section of your testimony, which starts at paragraph 22.
Okay.
This section starts out with a fairly lengthy discussion of someone named Rowe. Can you tell me who W.P. Rowe is?
Yes, he was an engineer that was hired 29, I think, 28 maybe, to start working on the Strawberry Springs and determining what the flows were and whether or not they could be diverted, and if they were diverted, what the outputs would be, so that BlueTriton's predecessors could make decisions along with the hotel property on development of those springs.
I want to object again. Again, it seems we're going farther than what is written in this testimony. For example, stating hired in a certain year, going into purposes of the employment.
Ms. Stody, what's your response?
My response is that in paragraph 24, it says that he was hired to direct and report the work, to determine the value of Strawberry Canyon Springs, and to testify in court regarding the same. and that they spent large sums of money to do that. So, I mean, I guess Mr. Lowe isn't reading his testimony, if that's the objection.
Okay, well, I guess my question is, what is the point of this summary? I mean, it's if it's just to sort of paraphrase what is here, I can read it. Why are we doing this?
Well, then I guess my question is, why are there any summaries in this proceeding? Because
Well, that's
if
because
it's pointless, then we don't want to do it either.
And that's why our hearing notice encouraged people to prepare summary slides so they really could just summarize the key points without going through paragraph by paragraph. So I guess I would just say, are there some particular key points in the, I mean, we're at paragraph 25 and we go to paragraph 61. So maybe you can just ask him one by one, just hit the key points you want to make here to have him summarize, and then let's wrap this up.
Okay, Mr. Lowe, I mean, can I lead my witness then? Because I really don't know how to ask open.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm going to allow a leading question here since you're really just asking him to summarize. That may help get us through this.
Mr. Lowe, is it your testimony that Mr. Rowe's methods and efforts to measure flows were indisputable?
I have no reason to believe that anyone would dispute those figures, those measurements. They're the same techniques that we used on the tunnel to measure small springs and to measure low flows. So I believe that those methodologies are great. It's the same that's even being used today by the people that are working on the adaptive management plan. So yes, I believe they're credible.
Okay, Mr. Lowe, is it your position that his notes and his observations of the Strawberry Canyon watershed were detailed and meticulous?
Without a doubt. Like I said, we were overwhelmed to find that good of notes and records from that long ago.
Okay. And did Mr. Rowe's observations of the riparian landscape at the time that he was observing the landscape differ from your personal observations of the riparian landscape in Strawberry Canyon?
Yes, it was much more lush at that time. There's whole sections of stream a half a mile long that no longer have surface flows. That's a major, major loss.
And is it accurate to say that only a small remnant of historical riparian habitat and dependent flora on our land?
Objection.
That's going too far into public. So I'm going to sustain the objection.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the objection, so that I don't do it again.
The objection at that point, we're really crossing into talking about public trust issues rather than hydrology issues.
Mr.
I
Lowe,
don't know how much we have to belabor this. He said very clearly that there were substantial flows and lush vegetation in 1930 when Mr. Rowe was out there, and that the creeks are essentially dried up today. I get that.
okay.
I understand that. I think you've made your point. I'm not sure whether there's any other point. And also, he's testified, which I think is very important, that Mr. Rowe apparently took detailed and meticulous notes and nobody disputed those. So are there any other points you need to make about Mr. Rowe, or can we move on?
So, Mr. Lilly, with respect, I'm a little stuck because habitat, the present day habitat Mr. Lowe has testified wouldn't support fish. And Mr. Rowe made comments about that. And that goes beyond public trust because it goes to whether or not there was a flowing stream. But I mean, this is in his written testimony. So I think the point, he has made the point. Okay.
And I get it. So I don't think we need to belabor it and argue as to whether or not we're crossing in from hydrology into public trust. I think we can just move on.
Okay, I think that we are finished because I mean, attempting to summarize his written testimony is, I mean, since the written testimony is in, it seems like a rather pointless exercise.
I think his written testimony is pretty darn clear. It's well written, and I think we've gotten it. So, and trust me, I have read it. You may cite it in your closing briefs. I'm sure you will. And we can go from there. So I just don't want to keep having this fight about what's a summary and what's not if we don't really need to. I'm not in any way diminishing his testimony. I think his testimony is quite valuable, frankly. But I think we've got it. So with that, and unless you have anything further you want to ask Mr. Lowe, I suggest we move to cross-examination.
I have no other questions.
All right, so who wants to cross-examine Mr. Lowe? Let me go back to my gallery view here so I can find everybody. Please raise your hand if you want to cross-examine Mr. Lowe. All right, so Mr. Sanders, I see. Any other hands? Mr. Petrozelli? Anybody else? No other hands. All right, so we did just have a break a few minutes ago, so I think we're going to have to keep going, or we will keep going now. So Mr. Petrozelli, I'll start with you. And again, subject to your usual disclaimers that you don't want to commit, how many minutes do you think your cross-ex is going to last?
Let's see. Maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes.
Okay, we'll put down 20 to 30 minutes. And Mr. Sanders, how long do you think your cross-ex is going to last? And I understand it may get to be longer after you hear Mr. Petrozelli's cross-ex.
Understood. I anticipate it'll be approximately 30 minutes, Mr. Lilly.
30 minutes. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have Mr. Petrozelli ask his questions now, and then we'll take a break. Mr. Sanders, that may give you a little time to, if you need to reorganize your questions based on Mr. Petrozelli's answers and Mr. Lowe's responses to those, which I think will help. Just as a reminder, I do follow Government Code 11513. That's why I keep citing it, because it is the applicable evidentiary rules here. And subdivision B does state that cross-examination is not limited to direct examination as long as the questions are relevant to the hearing issues. So that potentially could come up with Mr. Petrozelli's questions. I don't know if it will, but I just wanted to remind everyone that that is the rule that we apply here. So with that, Mr. Petrozelli, please proceed with your cross-examination questions. And it's 2:43. Nominally, you're limited to 45 minutes. It doesn't sound like you'll need that, but please go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Lowe, I believe you testified that you spent roughly the last 30 years of your career at the San Bernardino National Forest. Is that correct?
Yes, and then I had another probably 5 years as a consultant for the Forest Service on the tunnel project.
Okay, so about roughly what years did those 30 years cover?
Roughly from 1980 to 2010.
And then those additional 5 years would have been until about 2015?
Well, I actually, my last tunnel project was the 2012. I retired in 2007 with 40 years, and roughly 30 of it was on the San Bernardino.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about some of the row papers.
Okay.
And if you give me a moment. Where Mr. Rowe refers to, Mr. Rowe, I believe, refers to the springs by numbers. Where he refers to spring number 1, is that the same spring number 1 as that BlueTriton refers to as spring number 1?
I believe so. Spring 1 is now borehole 1A and 8, I believe. But yes, I think they're the same spring 1.
Okay, and is spring 2 the same spring that we know of today as spring number 2?
Yes. It's
And
all
is,
it's totally developed now with no water, but that is number 2.
and is spring number 3 the same that, and is what Mr. Rowe refers to as spring number 3 the same spring that we know today, or that BlueTriton describes today as spring number 3?
Yes, and it's also dry as a bone on the surface.
Okay. Is spring number 4 in the row notes the same as spring number, the same spring that the Dames and Moore 1999 report refers to as spring number 4?
Yeah, they all refer to spring number 4. It's kind of interesting because spring number 4 between 1 and 8, where exactly they call it the spring, I think may have varied, but it's the same spring and it was never developed. It's interesting because it looks like they actually took surface water from spring 4 before they finished spring 2, but it was never developed, and there's no piping away from spring 4.
Is spring 4 what Rowe refers to as the big spring?
Yes, and that's one of the most interesting things is spring 4, when prior to development, spring 4 and spring 2 were both producing around 60 gallons a minute. Once spring 2 was developed, spring 4 now produces less than 1 gallon a minute. It was unbelievable to me to see those figures, that spring 2 was able to almost totally dewater spring 4. Plus it was also partially dewatered by spring 1, borehole 1A and 8.
Mr. Lowe, are you familiar with the area near and around spring 4?
No, that's one of the only places I never went because it wasn't developed. So I had no occasion to go there much, except I would have gone now, but I've got some medical issues that keep me from getting down there.
Do you know if there's anything in or around the area of spring 4 that resembles a tunnel or something that might have once been a tunnel?
Nope, I couldn't find any record anywhere, and I haven't seen any of a tunnel at spring 4.
Are there any concrete structures near spring 4?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Moving on, I wanted to ask you about Exhibit 42.
Okay, Mr. Petrozelli, we can put it up, but you have to tell us which part it's 42.
It's Story of Stuff, Exhibit 42.
Okay, thank you.
And I apologize. I have to just object for a minute about the last line of questioning about spring 4. I believe Mr. Lowe had testified that he had never been there, and Mr. Petrozelli then continued to ask a series of questions about what was there. So I just don't think it's the foundation for those answers.
The objection is overruled because Mr. Lowe's testimony is that he has knowledge of all the springs based not only on his personal observations, but also from reviewing various documents and reports. So I think he does have sufficient knowledge to testify about the past and current condition of spring 4. So with that, we will put up exhibit SOS 42 on the screen.
If we could go to page 2 in the first paragraph. And Mr. Lowe, are you familiar with, do you recognize this document?
Yes,
Are you familiar with it?
yes.
Okay. Do you know approximately what date this document was drafted?
I believe it was September 29th, 1930.
Oh, okay. And if we could look at page, same page.
Objection, foundation.
But I think he has to ask his question. I think he's trying to establish a foundation. So the
He asked
objection
when
is
this-
overruled.
He asked when this was written. He never asked Mr. Lowe if he wrote this or how he came to believe that. We're lacking some structure here. What?
Mr. Lowe has testified, and his written testimony indicates that he's extensively reviewed all of the Roe reports. So I think that's an adequate foundation for him to testify as to his understanding of the date of this. Now, Ms. Grady, if you think his understanding is incorrect, you may raise that in your closing brief, but that objection goes to the weight of the evidence, not the admissibility. So the objection is overruled. Mr. Petrozelli, please proceed.
If we can go to the third paragraph, please.
And excuse me, just before we do that, Mr. Aldrich, can you just scroll up to the top? I just want to see if this letter has a date on it. Maybe it doesn't.
Some of them have a date at the end when they signed it.
Okay, all right. So maybe that would help us all. How many pages is this? Mr. Aldrich, let's just go down to the last page and see if we can find it. Or the last, no, before the tables, right there. Okay, so that may help us all rather than guessing. It's dated May 15, 1931. So, Mr. Lowe, do you have any reason to question that is in fact the date when Mr. Rowe signed this letter?
No.
All right. So why don't you go back then, Mr. Aldrich, go back to page 2, and we will continue with the questions.
Okay. So about the third paragraph, line 9, the sentence beginning, the dependable supply will aggregate about 10 inches of flow. Can we focus on, Mr. Lowe, do you see that sentence?
Yes, I was going to include that in my testimony also.
Okay, when it talks about.
And just so we're clear, Mr. Petrozelli, it says the dependable supply will aggregate about 10 inches. It does not say of flow. But anyway, go ahead.
Where it indicates 10 inches, is it referring to 10 inches? Is it referring to 10 inches of flow, first of all?
It's referring to 10 inches, 10 minus inches of flow.
And is that in Strawberry Creek?
I think what he's saying is if they develop the springs 1, 2, 3, and 4, that will aggregate and give them a dependable supply of 10 inches to put down their pipeline. And that's conservative because at that time it was producing 150 gallons a minute from those springs. So he was being conservative there. And also 1929 through 31 were dry years. So he felt comfortable that he could say 10 was dependable because it was a dry year. Most years would be better. And also because it was producing way over 100 at the time.
But when it talks about aggregating flow, is that aggregating flow in Strawberry Creek?
No, they're aggregating it into a pipeline.
Ah, okay. And where, and after this, and I'm sorry, this is hard for me to read. I see it where later in that sentence on the next line, where it asks, where it references, do you see the next line beginning 6 inches?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It's actually, that's actually an 8. And other places, it's clearly an 8. I had a hard time reading it too, but I think it's 8. 6 isn't
Okay.
consistent. But, yeah.
All right. Thank you for.
Yeah, this refers to the 10 inches. 8 inches are currently through spring 2, and the other 2 inches are still in the stream.
Is that 8 inches flow that otherwise would have discharged into Strawberry Creek?
Yes, it's clear now that it would have discharged in the creek.
All right. And then same paragraph down to line 13, where it says the sentence beginning the junction of flow.
Yes.
Do you see that?
Yep.
Okay. Do you know where that junction of flow is?
I believe that this junction here, Upper Springs, Old Intake, here to the iron pipe from Strawberry.
Wait, yeah, don't mumble, Mr. Lowe. You're going to drive the court reporter crazy.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Read to yourself or speak up.
Okay, yes, that's immediately below the channel that 4, 1, and 8 run down, and below 3 and below 2, and where they all come together is the common point. And there was measurements made there back in the day when Roe was there, and those same sites are being measured with almost all the subsequent studies that have been done by BlueTriton and their predecessors. And the current Forest Service studies are also measuring at that point, because it does aggregate the flow from all those springs.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then continuing down in this paragraph, the sentence beginning at this valley of Cienega, I think it is the 5th line from the bottom. Do you see that?
And that's in that same paragraph?
Yes. It begins at this valley.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing at this valley.
It's the 5th line from the bottom.
Okay, 1, 2.
And it's kind of on the right side.
Oh, at this valley, or Cienega.
Yeah. Okay.
The flow. Oh yes, that's a very important sentence.
Wait,
Mr. Lowe, let Mr. Petrozelli ask the question, please.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, where can you tell us where that is?
Wait, Mr. Petrozelli, I don't know what you mean by it, so please be more specific.
Okay. Let's see. It says at this valley or Cienega, the flow is augmented by springs. Do you know what springs this sentence is referring to?
Yes, that's the 10, 11, 12 complex. And yeah, that's spring 10, 11, and 12.
Okay.
And they're the flows.
Wait. No more, Mr. Lowe. Let him ask questions, please.
Okay, it was in that sentence. I was going to say it augments the flows of the stream. It's there.
Yeah, he just asked you the location and you answered that. So, Mr. Petrozelli, please proceed.
Okay. And And where it says the flow is augmented, is it referring to the flow of Strawberry Creek?
Yes, it's referring to the springs contributing to Strawberry Creek.
I'm going to object again to this again. We're just asking Mr. Lowe's opinion about what sentences say in this document. And
I'm going to overrule the objection, certainly under Government Code 11513C. He has specialized knowledge that allows him to testify to this. He has reviewed all of these reports in detail, so he does have some knowledge beyond what the rest of us have simply from reading one of these documents. So the objection is overruled. Mr. Petrozelli, you may proceed.
Thank you. If we can go on to page 3, first paragraph, line 1.
And just so we're clear, it's page 3 of the PDF file, which is numbered page 2 of the letter. And when you say first paragraph, Mr. Petrozelli, are you talking about the carryover text from the prior page?
Yes.
All right, please go ahead.
And Mr. Lowe, I'd like to direct your attention to the sentence on the right side beginning, there is no apparent.
Okay.
So it's asking about side inflow. Do you know which tributary it is referring to that this inflow is coming from?
And Mr. Waldridge, is there any way you can scroll up so we can see the prior sentence? I think in fairness to everybody, it's because it talks about this section of the stream, and there we go. Okay, so let me just look at this. All right, so I'm sorry, Mr. Petrozelli, to interrupt, but I just wasn't sure what was meant by this section of the stream. So why don't you repeat your question now?
Okay. So Mr. Lowe, where on the sentence at the top of page, what's identified as page 2, begins, there is no apparent side inflow. Then it continues, to indicate there's a comparatively large tributary area on the north side of the stream. What tributary is it referring to here?
You know, I have a hard time because it's not on any of Roe's maps. And so
Okay.
The closest I could tell from my mapping and Roe's description, there's a tributary from Spring 7 that comes in right at the Cienega from the other side of the stream. And the next one down of any size that I could tell that actually had a drainage channel is the East Fork of Strawberry. So there's a large area there that's called, I think they call it the valley.
Excuse me, Mr. Lilly, this is entering into an extremely bizarre territory. And I mean, at the beginning, we had a discussion early on about friendly cross, and it seems that what we're doing here, instead of cross-examination, Mr. Petrozelli is going through a series of questions, seeking surprise testimony from Mr. Lowe, apparently in an attempt to bolster the state's case on documents that they never considered in relation to the 2021 report of investigation, or in bringing this action. And it is, again, really making it very difficult for the respondent, who is the subject of the state's action, to even understand what we're addressing in this hearing.
All right. I don't think there is any limitation on Mr. Petrozelli asking these questions. I think they are authorized under
He's treating them as a direct.
Wait. Excuse me. I'm ruling now. Excuse me. I've let you speak. Now it's my turn to speak. I think this is authorized under subdivisions B and C of Government Code section 11513. To the extent he is certainly not allowed to ask leading questions because Mr. Lowe is not an adverse witness, but I think Mr. Petrozelli is not asking leading questions as far as I can tell. So I think that's appropriate. And as far as whether or not it's surprise testimony, I said before, and I'll say again, if you're going to need more time to prepare your follow-up cross-examination of Mr. Lowe, I will allow that. But I overrule your objection to the overall line of questioning. I think Mr. Petrozelli has a right to ask these questions during this hearing. So I will say I am confused as to where northwest side of the stream is, because my understanding is both the Spring 7 complex and East Strawberry Creek come in from the east side of the creek that we know as West Strawberry Creek. So I think there's some confusion here, and I don't know, Mr. Petrozelli, I think Mr. Lowe said he wasn't really clear about this. So I don't know whether you're going to get very far on this specific question. You can try, but considering Mr. Lowe's lack of knowledge about this specific question, it might make sense for you to move on.
Yeah, and if Mr. Lowe is unable to clarify this portion of Mr. Rowe's memo, I mean that's fine. It's these kinds of geographic references that I'm trying to work through.
All right, so why don't you
better understand it?
I wanted to go ahead and say as we'll see when we go out there, there is a drainage that comes.
All right, Mr. Lowe, that's no, you can't do that. Sorry,
Okay.
Our rules, you have to only respond to questions. So,
Okay, sorry.
and I'm sorry, but that's the way the rules are for this hearing. So, Mr. Petrozelli, I think we've cleared up. I did overrule Ms. Grady's overall objection. I've sustained her specific objection to Mr. Rowe testifying with no question. I think Mr. Rowe has said it's not clear as to what tributary area means to him. So I think it's best for you to move on at this point.
Okay. And Mr. Lowe, at the end of this paragraph, where it says the vegetation along the stream bed in this section is mostly alders and sycamore. Do you know which section of the stream that sentence is describing?
Let me see here. Okay, station 00, the stream flows in a deep canyon with alternating stretches of bedrock. Yes, the 00 is the old hotel intake, which is down in Strawberry Creek below the East and West Fork confluence where the Forest Service road crosses. So that's station 00. Deep Canyon. At station 39-0, the East Fork of Strawberry enters. So your question was, where are the alders and
which section of
sycamores
stream bed is this sentence describing?
Okay, the one that the very first end of the very first sentence on page 3.
The last sentence in this first paragraph on page 3 of the PDF.
Okay, can you raise it up a little bit? Your picture's in front of it, so I can't really. Okay, at station 39-0, that one?
Yes.
Okay, let me make sure where 39-0 is. Okay, 39 is at the confluence of the East Fork of Strawberry. So from the confluence of the East Fork of Strawberry down to the old.
Objection. It looks like Mr. Lowe is looking at some other document. We've completely lost control as far as creating a record of what we are talking about at any given point of time.
You may make a note of that. You may ask him that question on cross-examination about what else he may be looking at. The objection is overruled. Maybe Mr. Petrozelli, you should ask a question here. I think your question was, where is this section? Was that your question?
Yes. Where
So
is this section
Mr.
of
Lowe,
street?
try to just answer succinctly, if you know, what is your understanding of what this section meant in this letter from Mr. Rowe?
Okay, it means from the hotel intake in Strawberry Creek up to the confluence of the East Fork of Strawberry and West Strawberry.
Okay, good. That's the answer to the question. Mr. Petrozelli, ask your next question.
Okay, thank you. Down to the third paragraph. Oh.
Okay, we now have a paragraph that starts out during the winter of 1930/31.
Okay.
What is your question?
Trying to find my bearings. Can we look at the next paragraph, please?
Okay, we will scroll down. We're now to the bottom of the page. The paragraph, which looks like it carries over to the next page, begins.
Yeah.
We're at station 61.
Okay, I'm not finding what I'm looking for. That's fine. If
Okay.
we can go to page 5.
Okay, is that PDF page 5?
Yes.
Okay, I think that'll be probably numbered page 4 in the letter. All right, we're there.
Okay. And it should be this third paragraph, if we can zoom in on that.
Okay, one more click, Mr. Waldridge. There we go. Thank you. That helps me read this. Go ahead.
Mr. Lowe, can you take a moment to read this this third paragraph and also the fourth one too?
So we need to go up a little bit to read the fourth one, right?
No, I believe these two paragraphs, that this paragraph beginning the results,
Yes.
and then this paragraph, the last one before respectfully submitted, if you can just read those two.
Out loud or just myself?
Just take a moment to read them for
Okay.
yourself before I ask you about them. And let me know when you're done.
I'm done with the first one.
Okay,
Yeah, and I need to read the second one, right?
please do.
Okay.
Okay, so this vegetation removal project, was this a recommendation for Strawberry Creek?
Yes, Rowe recommended before they did any other development besides those springs, that they do some aerial flights and see where they had an alder in the stream and they could remove alder. But they also at that time.
Wait. I think that's answering his question. I think you've now answered his question. So please don't go
Okay.
on. Mr. Petrozelli, you may ask your next question.
Do you know if this vegetation removal project occurred?
Objection beyond the scope.
Excuse me, beyond the scope of what?
Your ruling limiting the public trust issues as not part of this proceeding.
Okay, the objection is overruled because I think this is relevant to the historical flow measurements. So if you know, Mr. Lowe, you may answer the question.
Yeah, so state the question again.
So this recommendation that Mr. Rowe has to remove, the vegetation, the alders, do you know if that project occurred?
From what I could tell from all the reading that we did, and I did, there was removal immediately around the springs. The thought about removing them downstream was kind of thrown out when they decided that they could kill them all.
Objection.
Wait.
No, it's important.
Wait. I think the question was just whether they were removed or not. And I think your answer is they were removed around the springs and not other places. So I think I don't want you to get into editorializing beyond that.
No, I won't, but they were removed downstream by the total removal of water. They determined.
All right,
okay.
All right, that's enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I believe those are all the questions I had for Mr. Lowe.
All right, so thank you, Mr. Petrozelli. So I said to Ms. Grady, I would have a break here to give her time to organize her questions of Mr. Lowe, and I'm going to do that. It's about time for an afternoon break anyway. So it's 3:16. Let's make it we'll make it 19 minutes. So we'll come back at 3:35 and resume. And at that point, Ms. Grady may begin her cross-examination questions for Mr. Lowe. 3:35, please come back.
Mr. Lilly?
Yes.
I'm getting a note from a personal issue with my daughter. Can we just make it a little bit longer, please?
What time would you like?
At least 3:45, please.
All right, let's make it 3:45. I mean, I certainly understand these personal issues. We all have them. So let's make it 3:45 and we'll come back then. And if you need more time, let us know. All right. So 3:45 and we'll go from there. All right, it looks like everyone is back and we can go on the record. I do see, Ms. Miller, that you have joined us, replacing Ms. Murray. So good afternoon and welcome to the hearing. And Ms. Grady, are you ready to proceed with your cross-examination of Mr. Lowe?
Thank you. My colleague, Mr. Sanders, is going to do the cross-examination.
Oh, okay. All right. So just, I know I said this before, but I will repeat. I normally have one attorney do both the objections and the cross-examination, but I may not have said that and we may not be clear. So it's fine. So Mr. Sanders, you may proceed with the cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. Good afternoon, Mr. Lowe. My name is Chris Sanders, and I'm an attorney with the law firm of Ellison, Schneider, Harrison, Donlin. I am here today representing BlueTriton Brands, Inc. in this proceeding. I will be doing the cross-examination of your testimony. I'm going to ask you numerous questions today based on your presentation and your testimony. Most of my questions will require you to respond yes or no. And as you've heard earlier today, there is a court reporter here who is transcribing the record. So please be sure to provide a clear verbal response rather than nodding or shaking your head.
And Mr. Sanders, I'm going to advise you on behalf of the court reporter, please slow down a little bit.
That's fine. Thank you. Mr. Lowe, you did not provide a resume or curriculum vitae for this hearing. Is that correct?
I provided my personal and professional background, and I believe that was included in my testimony as well as the story of stuffs. They provided it, and I also at one point in time had to fill out something saying why I was relevant or something to this whole proceeding and why I should be allowed to be involved, I think. And that included my professional background.
Did you provide a separate resume or curriculum vitae?
No, as I understood, I didn't have to.
Okay. Did you, well, I'll skip that for now. Did you prepare your testimony?
Yes.
Did you have any assistance with the preparation of your testimony?
People reviewed it after I wrote it.
And who were those people?
I believe I asked Amanda Fry to review it, and I asked Rachel Doty to review it.
Okay. Your testimony indicates that you are a professional wildlife and fisheries biologist. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you previously testified that you had a bachelor's from New Mexico State. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was that education described in your testimony?
No, I didn't think it needed to be.
Okay. Are you a licensed civil engineer?
No.
Are you a licensed hydrologist?
No.
Are you a registered hydrogeologist?
Nope.
Are you a licensed geologist?
Nope.
Are you a trained or certified historian?
Nope.
Are you an attorney?
Nope.
Thank you. The notice of intent filed by Story of Stuff in December of 2021 lists you as an expert for historic flows. Is that correct?
I don't remember if they listed me or not, but I guess I would be probably considered kind of an expert on historic flows.
What training do you have that makes you an expert of historic flows?
I have 40 years of working for the Forest Service where I had to determine as much as I could about the history of various streams and springs in order to make recommendations on how they should be managed.
So does that mean you've had no particular training on historic flows?
No specific training on that.
And what education do you have that makes you an expert of historic flows?
I have a real good education in fisheries biology and historic flows and what species they supported. And I've done a lot of research myself into trying to determine things like why species are where they are. So that's the experience I have.
And where in your testimony do you describe this special knowledge or skill?
I tried to describe, kind of what I do what I did for the Forest Service. And so I tried to describe my special knowledge and skills.
Are you aware that the original notice of intent filed by Story of Stuff in August of 2021 with the AHO listed you as an expert for biological resources?
I wasn't aware, but that's true.
Okay. And are you aware that the notice of intent filed in December 21 by Story of Stuff listed you as an expert for historic flows?
No, but that's true.
Do you know why your expert designation was changed?
No idea.
Okay. On page 6 and 7 of your testimony, you provide a summary of your professional opinions. Is that correct?
Hang on, let me get to page 6 and 7 of my
This is
Let's
SOS
go ahead
31.
and put it up on the screen. This is exhibit SOS 31. And it looks like it's PDF page 6. We'll start with. There we go. Thank you, Mr. Woolridge. All right, go ahead. Mr. Sanders, if you had a question, I missed it. So please go ahead and state your question.
It's okay. On pages 6 and 7 of your testimony, you provide a summary of your professional opinions. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is it your testimony that these opinions are based on your experience as a professional biologist?
They're based on my opinions as a resource manager, wildlife biologist, very knowledgeable person in hydrology and groundwater and surface water relationships. So, and based on I would say hundreds of professionals that I worked with on water related and groundwater, surface water related relationships. So this professional opinion is based on 40 years of that.
Can we bring up page 7 of SOS 31?
Okay, we're now on page 7 of SOS 31.
Mr. Lowe, can you please read paragraph 21?
21, my professional opinion is based upon the historical records, reports from various government agencies, including the Forest Service, during my tenure there, and my own personal observations as experienced biologist with long-term and consistent observation in the area.
Does that paragraph list anything other than as an experienced biologist?
No. And
thank you.
Okay, yeah.
For purposes
excuse me, I think Mr. Lowe is entitled to explain that answer. So Mr. Sanders, please let him finish his answer before you go to your next question.
Mr. Lilly.
Yeah, if I was writing this again, I would have added some stuff about geology and hydrology and flows, but I didn't do that because I thought there was plenty of that elsewhere.
All right, Mr. Sanders, you may proceed.
Thank you. For purposes of your testimony, did you define the row papers as SOS exhibits 40 to 58?
No, I didn't do it. I didn't submit a bunch of exhibits because I knew they were already being submitted. So as I understood it, they needed to be in the record, but I didn't duplicate ones that I knew were already going to be in there.
Mr. Lowe, on the screen right now is SOS 31, and on line approximately 13 and a half. Can you please read that?
My screen has row papers SOS exhibits 40 to 58. I don't see the 31.
No,
That's
no,
your
no,
exhibit
just so our
number.
record is clear, Mr. Lowe, this, on the screen is exhibit SOS 31, and he was asking you about the text, which you just read.
Okay, which text do you want?
Well, no, you just read it.
You
Go
just
ahead,
read
Mr.
it.
Sanders.
Number 21.
No, wait. Mr. Lowe, I think it is clear. He was asked what's on the screen is exhibit SOS 31. He asked you to read page 7, line 13 and a half, which states row papers, parentheses, SOS exhibits 40 to 58, close parentheses. So I don't want you to be confused, but I think you have answered his last question.
Okay.
So Mr. Sanders, you may proceed with your next question.
Correct. So, Mr. Lowe, I'm going to refer to the row papers as all of the SOS exhibits 40 to 58.
Okay.
Similarly, unless I refer to a specific document. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. And when you refer to Rowe, you are referring to Mr. W.P. Rowe. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is your understanding of historical flows and conditions based in part on the Rowe papers?
Yes.
And I believe you indicated that you were provided the Rowe papers by Ms. Fry. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when did Ms. Fry provide you those documents?
As soon as she got them from the Water Resource Institute.
And when was that?
I don't know.
Okay. Prior to Ms. Fry providing you copies of the Rowe papers, had you ever heard the name of W.P. Rowe?
Yes. In the work that I do with fire and fire restoration, I had heard of the Rowe name because they were very involved in predicting sediment flows post wildfire. And so, yeah, I'd heard of them, but I'd never really looked into their work until we found all of this.
Do you believe the Rowe papers to be complete?
Well, they're as complete as anybody's ever found. You know, every one of the studies that BlueTriton's predecessors paid for, all the Forest Service studies, all of those said there was really no flow information prior to the 40s and 50s. Well, thank goodness we found the Rowe papers and the original work that was done.
Please bring up exhibit SOS, exhibit 46, page 28.
Okay, we're getting SOS 46.
Correct.
And what page did you want, Mr. Sanders?
Page 28, please.
Page 28. Okay, we have it. I might tell us what you want us to read. This is a little hard to read, but we'll try to zoom in on what we need to.
Mr. Lowe, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Okay. And what is the date on the top of this page?
June 24th, 1926.
Okay. Please scroll down to the next page, SOS Exhibit 46, page 29. Mr. Lowe, does the entry on page 29 appear to be a continuation of the entry on page 28?
Yeah, it does. It's for Waterman Canyon and Arrowhead Springs, not anywhere related to the project.
Thank you. Please scroll down to the next page, SOS Exhibit 46, page 30. Mr. Lowe, what's the date on the top of this page?
May the 14th, I believe, 1931. It looks like.
Can you explain why there is a gap of approximately 5 years from June of 1926 to May of 1931 between these successive entries?
No idea really. No,
Thank
no,
you.
no idea.
And Mr. Lowe, do the next 5 pages, and that's of SOS Exhibit 46, and that's pages 30 through 34, all appear to be dated May and June of 1931?
So we'll scroll through them one at a time, slowly. Okay, so we now have page 31. And if you want, when you're ready, Mr. Lowe, we'll move on to 32.
And what do you want to say about that?
Do they all appear to be dated May and June of 1931?
That one is. Let's go to the next one. That appears to be. Is that another one? I don't
Yes.
see it.
Yeah, we have page 34 of the PDF file up now.
Yeah, that appears to be a continuation. That one's mainly talking about weather, not flows.
Okay. Can we scroll down to the next page, SOS Exhibit 46, page 35? Mr. Lowe, what's the date at the top of this page?
April 11th, 1948.
Can you explain why there is a gap of approximately 17 years between successive entries in this exhibit?
Yeah, Rowe was hired for specific reasons. So in 48, this was probably a whole different reason that he was working in 48. I haven't studied this real well because I didn't go into every single record that Rowe had ever measured. I looked for when he did it and why he did it, and especially related to the original flows prior to development and the years immediately following development up until the 40s.
Thank you.
What I did.
Do you know what type of measurement devices were used by Rowe to obtain what appear to indicate flow measurements?
Sure.
And again, Mr. Sanders, I'm going to ask you to be more specific because it's pretty clear that Mr. Rowe made flow measurements in a lot of different places on different creeks. So if you want to be specific as to Strawberry Creek, please restate your question. Or if you want to be specific as to certain springs, but anyway, just be specific as to location.
Sure. Do you know what type of measurement devices were used by Rowe to obtain what appear to indicate flow measurements of Strawberry Creek?
Sure. And it's very similar to what we use today on the tunnel project. Even though it was a $1 billion project, we took a pipe out there, we took a container of a known volume, we put the pipe in the creek and made it so that all the water flowed out of the pipe. We caught that pipe in a container and we came up with gallons per minute. That kind of a system works really good on these small streams and small springs. It's a way to capture the water and measure it. And that was the way Rowe did it. Whenever Rowe had a place that was stable enough, and it was real important to know, like at the confluence of the upper springs, he wanted to know what the continuous flow was there. So he put in a weir in that location. He also put in several weirs downstream. They're called V-notch weirs, and they measure the volume of water based on the height of the water. So those are exactly the same techniques that are used today. So yeah.
So would Mr. Rowe indicate what methodology he used for all of his entries of volume measurements from Strawberry Creek?
Nope, he didn't.
So thank you. And do you have experience using these types of measurement devices in the course of your professional experience?
Yeah.
Thank you. Have you ever measured flow in Strawberry Canyon using these devices?
I can't remember if we did Strawberry Canyon specifically. We probably carried the bottle and we carried a pipe so that we could do it when we came to a situation where we needed to know.
Please bring up exhibit SOS 46, page 40.
Okay, we have SOS 46. We'll move to page 40. I thought we had it. We lost it. Hopefully it'll come back. Okay, we now have SOS 46, page 40 of the PDF file.
Mr. Lowe, do you recognize these entries as prepared by Mr. Rowe?
Yes.
And how do you know they were records prepared by Mr. Rowe?
He always put his name on these records whenever he did them. If he had a helper, he'd list a helper sometimes. Yeah, so that's how I know.
Okay, let's walk through this.
Okay.
So starting at the top in the middle, please tell me what that says.
Clear and warm.
And what does that mean? What does that represent?
That represents the temperature, and it kind of represents the humidity on that day, which has a big effect on flows. So it was wise of him, and something that we do today is to record the temperature and whether it's cloudy, sunny, or whatever. It's important to evapotranspiration, so that's probably why he did it.
How does clear and warm represent humidity?
It represents that there's evidently not a lot of humidity. The spring areas where they are get very foggy. In fact, our field trip may be stopped by the fog. So it was important, very important, that that be recorded.
And in the upper left corner of this page, what does that say?
All I can see is the row. I can't tell what the second word says. And some of these are hard to read. So I didn't, in my presentation, I wasn't going to go into the ones that were hard to read.
So you agree that there's some problems, whether it's handwriting or various legibility issues with some of these documents?
Yeah, surprisingly little though, for as old as they are. They're very good.
And so your testimony is that both Mr. Rowe and that second name would have been on site?
Yep.
And then immediately to the right of that, there is a date. Is that correct?
The July 3rd, 23rd, 1931. That date?
Please read the line immediately below the date.
9:50 in the morning, spring number 1, 5 gallons and 45 seconds. I'm not sure what the end part says.
Okay, and so the 9:50, that's the time?
9:50, yes, is the time in the morning. He was walking, it was kind of interesting. He would walk down the stream and he would record the times, and then sometimes he would come back. So we have some recordings for the same spring twice in the same day.
Okay.
And the time is very, very important. There's a significant difference in flows in a lot of places in the morning versus in the afternoon. And that again is related to evapotranspiration, especially in July, August, September. There can be almost a 50% loss of flows during the hottest, driest part of the day. And then in the morning, they'll be up again.
So the entry spring 1 means that he was taking a flow measurement from spring 1?
Exactly.
And the entry for volume, how did he make that measurement?
Well, if you get 5 gallons in 45 seconds, then you can divide 45 into 60 seconds. And that'll give you like 1.25 or something. Then you multiply that times 5, and that would give you 6 point something cubic, that would give you 6 point something gallons per minute.
And you testified earlier, or you made a statement earlier about a methodology by using a pipe in the stream. Is that correct?
Correct.
How was this one measured?
It was measured with a pipe in the stream and then some kind of a, probably a gallon, looks to me like.
How do you
As
know
you'll-
it was measured? Oh, my apologies.
As you'll notice on some of the others, not on this one specifically, well, I forget what I was going to say, but yeah, this was measured with a pipe and a gallon, looks like.
Does it say that on this entry?
It doesn't say it on this entry, but at other places he describes that he did that, and he put in weirs in some locations. But these spring measurements, by the fact that it shows so many gallons in so many seconds, that means he was doing it with a pipe and a container that could catch that water.
Could it have been that this well was already developed?
Which well?
Excuse me, Mr. Sanders, I think you said well, I assume you mean spring. You might want to restate your question in terms of the spring.
Which spring are you talking about?
Wait, let him restate the question.
For spring number 1.
So now restate the, wait, let's, just so our record is clear, Mr. Sanders, just restate the entire question.
Sure. For spring number 1, could that measurement have been after the spring was developed?
I don't believe so because of the date. I think spring 1 was developed later than July 23rd, 31. July 3rd, yeah. So I think spring 1 was natural, and I think it would have said something. They almost always on spring 2, for instance, when it was developed, they would almost always say if it was turned out or if it was in the pipe. So I think if this had been developed, they would have said spring 1 was developed and in a pipe.
Okay, and how about the next entry, the 955?
955, number 2, it was locked because 2 had a locked door on it, as I understand it, on the vault that led to the tunnel.
And if Mr. Rowe was working for the owners of this spring, shouldn't he have had a key?
Oh yeah, he could have got in if he wanted to. He just didn't get in. He was measuring flows. He was, as you can see, he was headed down the creek. And so what was important to him was to measure the streams that still had flows and the springs that had flows, not to get into the locked door and see what was in the pipe.
And when you use a pipe to measure the flow from an orifice, do you have water that gets around the pipe?
What orifice are you talking about? And what?
Well, if you're measuring flow from a spring using the pipe, is all of the water collected in the pipe?
Oh, you try to make it so that as much as possible is collected in the pipe. There's always a little bit of leakage, but not much if you do it right in the right location.
And would you expect that estimate to be included with a flow measurement?
I don't understand your question.
If there was leakage, or even if there wasn't, would you expect Mr. Rowe to have provided an indication as to whether there was or was not leakage?
Oh, sure, he did. If there was any place where it was hard to capture all the flow, he made a note of that.
Okay. Let's go down to the line that starts with, it looks like Loudermilk Weir. is it correct that that line says Loudermilk Weir?
It appears to say that. I saw that and I didn't know what it was, and so I ignored it.
Does the Weir is located?
Excuse me?
Does this entry provide any indication of where this Loudermilk Weir is located?
No, that may have been what they called the weir at the junction of all the intersections of the spring streams. All the springs, 1, 2, 3, and 4, all had running water that flowed to a common point. And they may be calling that Loudermilk Weir, but they call it Weir 1. And you notice in 11 o'clock there, it says Row Old Weir 1. So I think what it may be is it may have been a weir that was washed out. One time when they opened up number 2 and put it back in the stream, it washed out the weir. So that was probably either the Loudermilk Weir or the old Row Weir that got washed out.
Would you agree that right beneath the Loudermilk Weir, it says 1040?
Let me see here. Mm-hmm.
Wait, Mr. Lowe, please say yes or no.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, yes. I see the
Okay.
10.
And then the entry for 11 o'clock indicates, well, read to me what the entry for 11 o'clock says.
The Row Old Weir number 1, old number 1 weir. And then the rest of that is some calculations for the height of the flow in the weir.
Okay, so if the Loudermilk Weir was sampled at 1040, is it safe to say that's not where the weir number 1 is, if that entry was at 11 o'clock?
No, he might have had a lunch or something. Might have ate something. If it's unbelievable when you see this country that he was able to cover so much country. So as rough as it is and steep as it is and brushy it is as it is. So this guy was quite a workhorse, and he may have taken a break.
Wouldn't the numbers that he has for each of those entries be similar then if they were one and the same?
You mean the time entry?
No, the flow measurement entries.
No, his weir may have been different size. So I really don't know. And I didn't study that. I didn't need to. He tells me what the flows are at the weirs when he measured them. And so I just use that.
Okay. So on the entry that begins at 11 o'clock, can you please read that line?
Row Old number 1 weir.
And the rest of the line?
I can't tell what it said.
Okay. Does that make it difficult to develop flow if you can't read the numbers?
Yeah, so those ones that I couldn't read, a lot of them were the weir calculations. I didn't need to read them because he summarized them.
And then can you read the line below that?
No.
Okay. And how about the line below that?
Difference equals mostly underflow.
And can you explain what that means?
I'm not going into all this I haven't gone into all this calculation here, so I can't explain it, but I can explain underflow. And that part of the area is very steep. So And there's a lot of talus slope and colluvium from the slopes that have fallen down in the bottom. So I can understand where he was finding that most of the water was underflow and not flowing on the surface.
Does that mean that there was water that was bypassing the measurement devices?
Water that was bypassing the measurement devices. There was there could have been some of that, and there could also just be additional spring water coming up in that colluvium through breaks in the granite boulders, so, or granite outcrop. So yeah, I mean, who knows? We can't judge here whether there was leakage and whether that might include leakage, or we don't know.
And please forgive me if I've asked this before, but when reporting flow measurements from the spring, does this document indicate whether the measurements were taken before or after a spring had been developed?
Yeah, like I said, if he was putting in numbers for anywhere that was in a pipe, he'd have said that.
Do you know when springs 1, 2, 3, and 4 were developed?
Do I know when?
Yes.
2 was developed in August of 1930. I have records if you want to wait for me to find them. You guys.
No, I was just wondering if you knew off the top of your head.
No, let's see. 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, I think we're all developed in the 30s.
Okay. And is the purpose of developing a spring to increase the quantity of water that naturally flows from the spring?
That can be part of your objective. Usually, most of the ones I've been involved in, it's to capture the spring water that's there, not to try to increase the flows. Sometimes you get increased flows when you dig them out. So yeah, that could be an objective too, but most of the ones I've been involved in, it was to capture the water that was coming to the surface.
Thanks. Please bring up exhibit SOS 42, page 2. Mr. Lowe, do you recognize, oh, not up yet, sorry.
We're getting it.
Thank you.
All right, we have SOS 42 up.
And do you recognize this document?
Yeah, what date is that? Do you see a date on it? Maybe go to the end.
This is sure.
I think.
Please go to the page 4 of this document, I believe.
Yeah, this is the one Mr. Petrozelli was asking about earlier.
Okay, and it's SOS 31?
42.
Oh, SOS 42. Okay, I got my notes. Go ahead.
Okay. And back on page 2, please. Mr. Lowe, can you read that first sentence?
Attached here to find tabulations of stream flow measurements of Strawberry Creek since September 29th, 1931.
If this report is dated May 15th, 1931, how could it include stream flow measurements since September 29th, 1931?
Yeah, I noticed that myself. It was an error. Going down, I think he clarifies it down further. Yeah, if that's the only error he ever made, then that's pretty good.
Okay.
But let's go down and see. I think he keep going. I think I remember it being a little further. I don't see it.
Okay.
Keep-
Can we please turn to SOS?
Wait,
Yeah,
one more page. We can keep going.
yeah, I thought I remembered an initial here somewhere where he or someone else who read it corrected that date.
Please turn to page 6 of SOS Exhibit 42.
Let's just finish scrolling through this.
Yeah, that's,
I did see one place where the text referenced September 1930, but I'm not seeing any corrections here.
yeah, I don't either.
Okay, we'll move on.
Okay, this page here, please.
Okay.
This page
We're
is
now on
entitled.
PDF page 6 of Exhibit SOS.
Correct. This page is entitled Miscellaneous Measurements on Strawberry Creek. Is that correct?
Correct.
And under the title, please read the line that begins with 1930 to 31.
You mean the elevation, or what do you want me to read?
Right next to where it says, immediately under the word miscellaneous is 1930-31. Can you read the rest of that line?
Oh, inches under 4-inch pressure.
Okay, and what does that mean?
It's talking about, it comes from mining, kind of historical mining use in sluice boxes and trying to predict how much water. So it's a way to measure water, and the size of the openings and the amount of inches of water affect the pressure and affect how much water.
Thank you. And immediately under that entry, there are several columns with dates. Is that correct?
Yes.
And below the column that starts with a date of September 29th, there are measurements for 4 springs, numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And for spring 1, there is a number of 0.8. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what are the units for that number?
Those units there are miners inches.
Okay. And approximately how much is 0.8 miners inches in gallons per minute, if you know?
0.8 times 9. It's about 7.2 gallons per minute.
Okay. And for spring 2, still for September 29th, the entry is ND. Is that correct?
Yep.
And what does the ND stand for?
It means there was no flow in the stream and it was diverted.
Okay. And the reported flow for spring 3 on September 29th was 1.4. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the reported flow for spring 4 has an entry of T. Is that correct?
Yes.
And do you know what the T stands for?
Yep. Trace. I think it's going up, and you can see that in the legend, but by this time, spring 2 was taking almost all the water that historically had gone to 4. So that's, I imagine what that T is a trace. That was all there was left, was a trace.
And still for September 29th, just below the measurements for the springs, there is a row entitled Total Springs Not Diverted. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the number for the total springs not diverted for September 29th is 2.2. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that number 2.2, does it appear to be the addition of the measured spring flows numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 from above that were not diverted?
Let me study this a little bit. Yep.
Okay. On page 7 of SOS 42 has more of these flow measurements just for different dates. Is that correct?
Yep, it's later in the year. So I didn't pay much attention to those because what I was really concerned about was the low flow periods.
Okay.
But if you want to talk about these, we can.
I'm going to turn one more page to page 8 of SOS 42. And in the column for January 2nd, please read to me the spring measurements for what is marked as springs 1, 2, 3, and 4.
1 is 1.8 minors inches. 2 is that, I can't tell if it's 8.2 or 6.2. Can anybody else tell?
Mr. Lowe, you're the only person who's testifying, so just say you can't tell and move on. We
Yeah,
can't have other people do it.
I can't tell for sure, but based on everything I know, nope, that D makes me think that part of it was diverted, or that was probably the diverted amount. So that 8.2 is about 100, 8.2, about 70, 72 or 75 gallons per minute. But it was diverted, it appears, and put into the pipeline. And spring 3 is 1.2 minors inches, or about 10 or 11 gallons per minute.
And spring 4?
Spring 4, I can't really tell. Is that 6? I can't tell. I can't tell what that is.
Is there any way to blow that up?
We can make it a little bigger.
Yeah, that's a 6, it appears.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Wold, thank you, Mr. Woldridge. Can you zoom back out so we can now look at the.
And the next row down for January 2nd is entitled Total Springs. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that number listed in total springs, which earlier was identified as total springs not diverted, is the sum of the spring numbers that are not diverted. Is that correct?
You would think so, but the numbers don't seem to add. The spring number 1 and spring number 3 together would be 3, and it only shows 2. So yeah, that's a skeptical, or I would be skeptic of those numbers until I figured out, had more time with them to study them.
Okay.
But again, what time of year was this? Go up again.
This was in
January. So this is a rainy time of year. It's actually the month we get the most rain normally, I think, January. So that 6 at number 4 was undoubtedly affected by surface flows. If you look at all the others with the diversion of number 2, there's no place that has surface flows anywhere near 6 minors inches. So that number 4 figure had to have included rainfall and surface flows from the rainfall and snowmelt.
For January 16th,
Yeah.
do those spring flows that are not diverted add up to 2.0?
1 point. Yeah, those do add up. Oh, except for the 6. And again, 6 is undoubtedly runoff from rainstorms and snowstorms in January, which is our rainy time of year. So that's why.
So those.
Go ahead.
My apologies. So those numbers don't add up. Is that correct?
Well, no. You know what? I don't know. They don't add up, but we don't know exactly. He may have excluded somehow the runoff from number 4 in his calculation because it was so much surface flow, not spring flow.
And for January 25th, do those numbers add up?
Yeah, the 3 and the 1 do add up, and again 4 is probably a whole bunch of surface flow.
But those numbers, the ones that are not diverted, which are 1, 3, and 4, those don't add up to the number listed under total springs. Is that correct?
He's not counting hardly any of number 4 as spring flow. And that's based on all the records that we have. When 2 was developed and diverted, there's no flow in number 4. So the flows in number 4 have to be rain events and snow events and not spring flow. That's why he didn't include them.
So when he's recording spring flows, there's times when it is spring flow and times when it's not spring flow. Is that correct?
At number 4, because number 4 is down drainage. So number 4 would be affected the most by runoff versus spring.
And where is that documented?
Well, you don't have to be a scientist to know that. You just, if you look at the topography out there, you look at the amounts of rain and the kind of rain events we get, there's no doubt that there would be runoff. And all the information points to the fact that spring number 4 of all the springs would be the one most affected by seasonal runoff.
Okay. Are you aware that colleagues also pointed out additional errors that Mr. Rowe made?
Objection vague as to colleagues.
Yeah, I'm going to sustain the objection. Mr. Sanders, maybe you can be more
Sure.
specific with your question.
Please bring up exhibit SOS 55 at page 57. Mr. Lowe, do you recognize this letter?
No, I haven't read that letter.
Do you recall whether you identified it in paragraph 27 of your testimony?
Let me look and see if I can find this. This is SOS 55.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'm aware of that letter. I'm aware of the row. Well, let's go down. It doesn't seem to match to what I have for SOS 55.
And I'm going to object that Mr. Sanders had mischaracterized testimony, as Mr. Lowe does not actually cite to as exhibit SOS 55, pin site 57 in his paragraph 27 of his testimony.
Wait, so what do we have up here? We have SOS 55. Okay. So I'm sorry, I'm not following. I'm just trying to keep track of the question. But this is page 57, and in paragraph 27 of Mr. Rowe's testimony, he cites SOS 55, page 26. So this is a different page than the one he cites. So I think we need to get that clear. And with that, Mr. Sanders, why don't you ask your next question? To the extent there was confusion, I sustained the objection, but mainly just I think, Mr. Sanders, it would help if you restated the question. Because we're talking about two different pages of the same exhibit here.
My apologies. Mr. Lowe, do you recognize this document?
No.
I'm sorry, didn't you just answer that you said yes?
Wait. Excuse me, Mr. Sanders. By this document, that's ambiguous here. Do you mean this particular page of this exhibit or the entire exhibit? Okay.
Mr. Lowe just answered that he recognized SOS exhibit 55, page 57.
Objection mischaracterizes prior testimony.
Yeah, I don't think he said that, but let's just ask him. Mr. Lowe, do you recognize this page, page 57 of Exhibit SOS 55?
No, I know SOS 55, but I didn't specifically pick this letter to think about much.
I'm sorry, you broke up. You didn't pick this letter to what?
I didn't spend any time looking at this letter.
Okay. Right.
It's part of 55, but I concentrated on other parts of 55.
All right, Mr. Sanders, you may proceed.
Sure. In your testimony, did you testify that you reviewed all of the row papers?
Yes, I reviewed all of the row papers where he did studies and evaluated the stream and tabulated his results.
So does that mean you did review all of the row papers?
Objection, mischaracterizes prior testimony. I don't see any place in Mr. Lowe's testimony where he says he reviewed all of the row papers.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I think he did just say he reviewed all of the row papers. I will point out this does not appear to be a row paper, but I think he did say he reviewed all the row papers. So, Mr. Sanders, why don't you either restate your question or rephrase it if you want to.
I was just wanted to ask Mr. Lowe to read the second sentence on this page.
Okay, and
this is,
if he has never seen this letter before, what's the point of having him read something that all the rest of us can read just as well, Mr. Sanders?
And that's fine, Mr. Lilly. He indicated that he had reviewed all of the row papers in his testimony, and that's fine. I'll withdraw the question.
All right, because I don't think this is a row paper. That's not prepared by Mr. Rowe.
Mr. Lowe, did you designate SOS exhibits 40 to 58 as the row papers?
Which page are you looking at? Oh, yes, I guess we did. I guess I did do that.
So you reviewed some of the row papers?
No, I reviewed all the papers where Rowe had done any measurements or descriptions of reporting of what he had measured and letters that he had sent to other engineers. I read all of those things. I didn't read this letter here, which was about a couple errors that he made. I didn't think that was important in what I was doing.
What documents of the row papers did you not review?
I think I reviewed all the row papers. This isn't a row paper to me. This is somebody commenting on a row paper.
Okay. Mr. Lowe, during your questions from Mr. Petrozelli, you were referring to documents that you had immediately adjacent to you to answer your question. Is that correct?
You mean as Mr. Petrozelli was questioning me, was I looking at papers?
Correct.
Mainly I was looking at the Rowe map. There's a real good map that Rowe developed, and that map is critical to understanding the Rowe papers. You have to know where the stations were, where the weirs were, where the Cienega was, where the camps were. All those things are critical, and they're only on the Rowe map. And so I was looking at the Rowe map with actually with a magnifying glass, because the map is fairly small, the words are fairly small, and I'm getting old. So that's what I was looking at.
Did you utilize any other documents to answer questions during your testimony or cross-examination?
Sure, I've got paper after paper after paper of notes.
Can you please preserve all of those documents, please?
Sure.
Okay. And during your questioning, you were, it looked as if you were receiving input via your cell phone. Is that correct?
No, I might have been doing something with my cell phone, but I wasn't receiving any input during my testimony.
Okay. please make sure you reserve all of those, or preserve all of those documents, notes, and any electronic communications that were used during your testimony.
Sure.
Um,
And Mr. Lowe, I'm going to instruct you to do that as well. That they're not asking for them now, but please keep them because they are entitled to see, we are entitled to see if somebody wants it, what you were referring to during your testimony. Mr. Petrozelli, your hand is up. Go ahead. We have a slight pause here.
I just want to note that we're getting pretty close to 5 o'clock.
I'm keeping my eye on the clock too. Mr. Sanders, how much more time do you think you have for questions? You have been going on for about an hour now.
Mr. Lilly, I believe that I'm done, but if you'll give me 3 minutes to confer with or maybe 5, to confer with my colleagues to make sure that we're complete.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that because it would be nice to wrap this up today if we can. I mean, we're going to have to come back tomorrow to handle exhibits, but let's see if we can, if you're done with your process. So let's do 3 minutes and tell me then if you need more time. So we'll just turn off microphones and cameras and come back at, well, it's all right. We'll make it 5 minutes. 4:52. Let's all come back. Thank you. We're just getting close to 5. Let's go. 4:52. Everybody can turn off till then. All right, I'm back. Mr. Sanders is back. Mr. Sanders, what's the word on additional questions, if any?
I'm going to ask one and maybe two questions, but it will literally be 30 seconds.
All right, well, go ahead.
Mr. Lowe, did you ever provide copies of the Roe papers to State Water Board staff, Office of Enforcement?
You have to go off mute, Mr. Lowe. We can't hear you. There you go.
Yes, I probably did. Working for a government agency like I did, we wanted to know everything possible. So anything that I have that relates to this, I felt like was important to share with the state board divisions that I normally sent stuff to.
And when did you provide those documents to Office of Enforcement staff?
I'm not sure. Pretty soon after I got them from Amanda Fry, I believe.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Mr. Lilly.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sanders, and thank you, Mr. Lowe, for your testimony. Ms. Doty, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
I do. I would like to have the opportunity to redirect tomorrow morning if possible, please.
Okay, that's fine, except it'll be tomorrow afternoon. But we're going to have to come back anyway. Mr. Donlin said he has to leave at 2:30. We will certainly respect that. I think if we come back promptly at 1 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, we can go through Ms. Doty's redirect. I may have a couple of questions. That's what lawyers always say, but I really do mean it, just a few. And then we will have to go through admissions of exhibits. We do still have Mr. Lowe's own case, but I'm going to recommend that he simply authenticate that written proposed testimony. And I don't know that he needs to summarize it. I mean, we can all read it pretty well, and he has already testified at length as part of the Story of Stuff project. So we'll see. My goal is to try to finish in an hour and a half tomorrow so we all can go about our other endeavors on Wednesday, but if necessary, we'll come back on Wednesday. So with that, we're going to go ahead and adjourn for today, and we will be back tomorrow afternoon promptly at 1 p.m. Is there anything anybody needs to cover before we sign off? Everybody's ready to wrap it up for the day. All right. Thank you all very much. We will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Goodbye.